Hi guys, welcome back. So we're coming on to 1.7, which is urbanization. Now there's a lot of overlap with 1.7 and a few of the other topics that we've talked about. So some areas I will spend a little bit more time on. Sometimes I'm going to run through areas a bit quickly, and other sections then I'm just going to refer you back to the previous section. So let's have a look then. We have two real distinctive sections here. We're going into this idea of squatter settlements again and rapid development, changes that happen, but it's mainly focused on urbanization. So with urbanization, we have the percentage of people living in an urban area increasing. So more people living in urban areas than ever before. And with counter urbanization, then we see people migrating back from urban areas to rural to live outside of the city. So we see that as a trend mainly in developed countries. Urban sprawl then is just a term we use for the physical expansion of the city. We used it in the last video as well. So let's have a look at trends of urbanization. So we could see here that from 1950 all the way to what we anticipate in 2050 is a slow but consistent increase. Okay. Around 2020, we see that we've gone over the 50% mark, but this is just a global average. We can see it shooting up from 1950s. Even in the 1950s, most developed countries had a very high percentage of urban dwellers, like 70, 80, maybe more. Less developed countries, middle income countries, suddenly getting very rapidly going through urbanization and having a higher percentage there. So their populations are quite large in a lot of cases. And so they're increasing the world average then. So we can see where it's going, meaning it's a very critical thing to study right now. If we're looking around at the general trends, then countries that are up in the 80 to 100% are often heavily industrialized countries, or HICs. So Western Europe, Northern Europe, and North America, a lot of South America as well, and certain countries then in the places like South and Central Asia. But areas that are at its lowest, then we tend to have low income countries or even middle income countries, or say LEDCs often have a lot of people still working in the rural areas. Especially when we look at this region around South and Southeast Asia, we still see a lot of people living in rural areas there, meaning that a lot of people are probably still involved with the primary industry. Okay, so these changes have come about over a long period of time, but we can see the divide. So the countries in the yellow then are the next in line to see a over 50% change in the population in the urban areas. And there's a few considerable countries that we have to look at, like China and Indonesia, for example, have very large populations and are just about to go through rapid urbanization or going through it at the moment. So at this point as well, we can mention that megacities are growing. So a city with a population of over 10 million, we went from only having three of them in 1960 to having 35 in 2020. So have a look down through that list. You might be either very close to one or you might be actually living in one. There's a good chance, as a lot of my students from all over the world come from one of these cities. So these cities then are known as megacities with a population of 10 million. Now, this just shows you that a very unique situation when you have a population of that size, you've got a huge amount of issues that you have to deal with. So we're going to address some of those. We see the population in the world in regions then. If we look at the world on average, it's increasing. But as I said before, if we look at the average of Latin America and Caribbean countries, that spiked very early on after 1950. However, the more developed regions have always had a very high amount, both currently up there and an extremely high amount, high 80, high 90% of the population. African countries then are the lowest, or they're intertwining between Asia and Africa as the lowest there, but also a very rapid rate of growth as well. So even they'll see now, they'll rise up and finally be a little higher percentage than we can see here. So the push factors and pull factors. So why do you want to leave the rural and come into the urban? So reliant on subsistence farming is not exactly the best thing in the world, because you might have low income, sudden change, drought. These types of things would mean that you're vulnerable to sudden changes. We also see mechanization of jobs in the rural area will change the industry slightly, meaning that less people will have jobs for, manual labor, let's say. Communication through technology, wanting alternative lifestyles, being exposed and understanding what life in the city is like, and reducing the barriers to migration then as well. So we see pull factors entering the urban areas, more working in the service industry, the tertiary, quaternary, higher incomes, often more sanitation, electricity, and internet. Now, this isn't always the case because, as we already looked at in the previous section, the sanitation can be a lot lower for migrants moving in. So what it means is you can achieve a lifestyle that has all of these things, but you don't necessarily have it when you move there immediately. Hey, as always, if that was useful, like, subscribe, and I'll be able to post more videos then. But also, if you want the rest of the content, follow the links below and you should find what you're looking for. All right, good luck, guys.